What happens when you combine aerospace engineering and gun culture? Think NASA-level tolerances, handmade triggers, and rifles built beyond military standards, all coming out of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. This is not your average gun company. This is the story of RISE Armament. Imagine the whole industry you're working in doing a nosedive, or maybe the market's so packed full of meh stuff it feels impossible to even get noticed. And then there's that deep down feeling that is burning inside you to stop doing your day job and make something truly awesome for folks you care about. That's exactly how the story of RISE Armament begins. Strap in, because we're going to go through the story of how some nerdy engineers changed the way we buy triggers. Matt Torres studied at the University of Texas at Arlington and graduated with a degree in engineering. He, along with others, started a precision manufacturing business after their time in school called RISE Manufacturing. RISE Manufacturing's main focus was on producing aerospace components, which are used in planes, spaceships, and they also dabbled in the oil and gas industry. The thing about those industries is that they require fine detail in their engineering for whatever components that they are using, because the projects these engineers are working on typically are very expensive, and there is a lot at stake if something goes wrong. If a part of a plane goes wrong, that could be a life or death situation. And if a single part on an oil drill goes bad, that could mean that some Texas oil tycoon loses millions of dollars, or a guy on the oil rig could die. There are also a bunch of regulations in both of these industries, meaning that engineering these individual components typically has to pass through multiple inspections, aligned with strict tolerances, making them as safe as possible. Along with making these components, these engineers were also avid firearms enthusiasts. They occasionally built and shot guns all the time, and they would go to the range all the time too, sometimes even during work hours. As one of the employees, Garrett Grover, put it, they wanted an excuse to spend more time out at the range. A relatable problem I'm sure we can all relate to, right guys? Their machine shop was thriving in the early 2000s, making aerospace and oil field parts, until the oil market started hitting some ups and downs, and then orders started drying up, so the future looked a little uncertain. But instead of shuttering the doors, they asked, what if we built something we actually care about? Like I said, these guys were shooters, hunters, and engineers, so the answer to them was obvious: AR-15 parts. So, with their precision engineering background, they decided to try their luck at building a trigger. Now, why a trigger? At the time, they looked around the trigger market, and they saw the mil-spec style triggers that were inexpensive, but not up to the high standards they had as engineering and gun enthusiasts. Chris Barger, I hope I'm saying that right, who was president at the time, said the company saw a gap in the market. He realized, quote, there wasn't a quality trigger group available at around the $100 price point. So there wasn't much in the middle for their average shooter to upgrade to if they didn't want to spend the $200 or $300 to upgrade to a high-end Geisley trigger, for example. If they were going to bring a trigger to the market, they had to develop something unique and special, or else they would be just another dime a dozen trigger that nobody would care about and nobody would buy. So what was this unique touch they were going to add? Let's get into the process of how they brought their unique aerospace engineering to build these unique triggers to understand how they did it. The engineering team at RISE followed aerospace rules for everything they designed, which was wild for a gun company at the time. They even had these fancy certifications like AS9100. If a company holds this certification, it means its processes meet the same high-stakes standards as places like NASA demand, the Department of Defense, or War, or even places like Boeing. But don't worry, they did it a lot better than Boeing. What that really meant was that every single part they cranked out of their shop had to be perfect. We're talking about inspections and tolerances way beyond most gun makers bothered with. For example, they used this crazy high-tech equipment that could measure things down to 5 decimal points. Most other companies, they just checked 2. This meant whenever a customer opens one of their packages, they knew it was consistent and precise, leading to a much higher and glassier trigger feel than other triggers in the same price point. And how did they do it? It was a mix of cutting-edge tech and good old-fashioned craftsmanship. They poured a ton of money into these CNC machines, making parts like triggers and receivers out of super strong materials like heat-treated tool steels and aircraft-grade aluminum with increased accuracy from those high-end CNCs. Not only that, they started rigorous inspections that are, again, similar to aerospace inspection protocols. According to Garrett Grover, who is a product specialist at RISE Armament, quote, "Every single trigger is hand-assembled and tested. Someone else then tests that same trigger again before it goes into the package," unquote. That's pretty hardcore for a new trigger manufacturer, especially one just starting out. This high-end process led to RISE Armament's very first product, the RA-535 Advanced Performance Trigger, a drop-in AR-15 trigger that would become the company's flagship offering. When it dropped in 2014, it immediately blew people away. It was a single-stage unit offering exceptionally crisp 3.5-pound brake with almost no over-travel and an extremely fast reset. Housed in RISE's signature red anodized cassette, the RA-535 gave shooters a competition-quality trigger that rivaled or exceeded the performance triggers of other high-end manufacturers on the market. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for RISE just yet. In 2014, the oil business was not doing very well. The oil and gas industry started to dry up, so to speak, and the entire industry started to see a reduction in business. If they didn't find a solution and pivot fast, it could have meant the end of their business as they knew it. Matt Torres and the rest of the leadership team had a choice now. Do they give up this experiment of trying to be a firearms manufacturer and double down on the oil and aerospace industry? Or do they leave the industry that they were used to and pursue what they truly were passionate about in the firearms space? Speaking of the firearms industry, the landscape of the AR market had changed quite a bit in the years leading up to this big decision, so it wasn't like this was the safest path either. Because in the 2010s, the firearms market was really volatile. A spike in gun sales, known as the mid-decade gun scare, thanks Obama, led many people to buy AR-15s en masse. Once that administration left office though, and the panic subsided, the market was now flooded with a ton of basic ARs. So now the RISE team was at an impasse. Their current base of work was dwindling, but jumping into a space they had only minimal experience in when the future of that industry was unknown was not exactly the safest move either. Enter the RA-140, a $99 trigger with a crisp brake and drop-in installation. Sounds perfect, right? But there was a catch. Most shooters assumed the $99 trigger had to be just junk, and no one really believed that it could be that quality. So RISE fought back with a clever marketing solution. Interactive displays at local gun shops where customers could literally feel the trigger brake for themselves. That hands-on experience flipped skepticism into sales, and suddenly RISE triggers were flying off the shelves. Let me tell you, the RA-140 delivered. It offered a super clean 3.5-pound brake and a short reset similar to the RA-535, performing as well as triggers costing twice as much. By making high performance so affordable, it basically took away the excuse AR owners had for sticking with those heavy, gritty mil-spec triggers. This move massively boosted RISE Armament's brand recognition and brought in a ton of new customers. Turns out their instincts were right after all, and the RA-140 became one of their best sellers, helping establish RISE as a, quote, premier manufacturer and supplier of triggers. This growth allowed them to launch new products. Triggers were just the beginning, and they took things further, a lot further. They started producing complete rifles, precision barrels, uppers and lowers, and even more. They even collaborated with law enforcement and competitive shooters to ensure every part met real-world demands. Their first big leap was the Watchman rifle, a duty-grade AR-15 designed with SWAT officers, military snipers, and firearms instructors. It was yet another precision-engineered item, this time taking the same processes that they learned making triggers and applying them to the entire rifle. It was affordable enough that entire police departments started adopting it as well. With these product expansions, RISE went from a niche trigger maker to a one-stop AR performance shop without ever compromising its aerospace quality standards. To meet the growing demand, RISE staffed up, bringing in almost 60 total employees while simultaneously turning to factory automation to increase capacity. With guidance from the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance, they implemented collaborative robotics called cobots on their production lines around 2020. This modernization led to millions in new sales and cost savings, positioning the company to meet the surging demand without compromising quality at all. But don't worry, just because they use these robotics doesn't mean they sacrifice quality. Each drop-in trigger group is still hand-assembled and individually fine-tuned by technicians at the factory. Only those that pass all the checks make it outside the door. From there, RISE Armament's growth continued with iterations and expansions to their product lines, like my personal favorite, the Rave 140 trigger, an evolution of the original RA 140 while still maintaining a competitive price point. The Rave featured enhanced reliability and an even easier installation method, eliminating the need for set screws on the cassette style. RISE Armament has really grown its product line with more triggers, complete guns, and expanding into small parts like muzzle devices and lower parts kits. Speaking as a retailer for just a second, what really stands out to us and why we confidently recommend them all the time is their lifetime warranty mirrors ours here at AT3. It's that level of support combined with their high manufacturing standards that makes them an easy recommendation for us here. And that's why most of us here at the shop have Rave triggers in a lot of our personal guns. Along the way, RISE Armament has cultivated a strong culture built on patriotism, service, and customer focus. The team describes themselves as, quote, machinists, engineers, executives, hog hunters, target shooters, coyote killers, and some of us here are veterans. All of us are patriots, Americans to the core. And this isn't just talk, guys. About 30% of RISE employees are U.S. military veterans, which is always awesome to see. In fact, in 2021, they were formally honored by the U.S. Department of Labor for their commitment to hiring veterans. RISE Armament's story isn't just about making gun parts, it's about what happens when grit meets aerospace precision. A group of engineers saw their main business crumbling, took a massive risk, and built something shooters actually wanted. It's proof that even in a crowded market, the right mix of passion, innovation, and stubbornness can turn a small machine shop into a name trusted by police officers, competitive shooters, and weekend range warriors alike. So the next time you pull on a RISE trigger and feel that crisp break, remember that it's the sound of a group of machinists who refuse to settle for meh and make something that they could be proud of too. If this story of a small idea explodes into a massive company with tons of fans, that's because there are tons of these kinds of stories in the AR space. The biggest of which is probably Magpul. I know, it's a small company, so you've probably never heard of it. So if you want to learn more about this little company that no one's heard of, you can watch the entire history of Magpul video that our gun historian Sam put out not that long ago, right here. We'll see you over there.